Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going to unpack a story that is equal parts shocking, heartbreaking, and honestly incredibly inspiring. We're talking about the true story behind one of the most recognizable brand names in human history. I mean, you see this name everywhere, right? On the highway, at the racetrack, floating high above massive sporting events. But the real story behind that famous name? It's actually one of the greatest and most tragic tales of industrial innovation you'll ever hear. So let me ask you this. Who exactly is the billionaire behind Goodyear tires? When you see that iconic blimp soaring up in the sky, or you're shelling out for a new set of tires, it's so easy to picture the guy behind the name as this wealthy, cigar-smoking 19th century tycoon. You know the type, a guy who built a massive empire, sat at the head of a mahogany boardroom table, and passed down billions of dollars to his heirs. It just makes logical sense, doesn't it? Well, hold on to your hats, because the truth is a staggering, almost unbelievable irony. Yes, the modern Goodyear company is a multi-billion-dollar global powerhouse. But Charles Goodyear, the actual man whose genius literally made modern rubber possible, he died completely penniless. We're talking a mountain of debt. And honestly, the most shocking part of this whole shebang is that he had absolutely zero part in founding the company that bears his name today. None whatsoever. So how in the world does a guy change the trajectory of modern industry and end up with absolutely nothing? Let's get into it. Section 1. The name behind the tires. To really understand how this happened, we have to rewind to the early 1800s. Charles Goodyear was actually a pretty promising hardware merchant down in Philadelphia, but by 1830, his life basically hit a brick wall. He suffered from severe health issues, specifically this incredibly debilitating dyspepsia, and his business endeavors totally collapsed. His early career was basically decimated, but as you'll see, his story was just getting started. That brings us to Section 2. The sticky rubber problem. Right around 1831, Goodyear became completely obsessed with this new, seemingly magical material called gum elastic. Today, we just call it natural rubber. He devoured everything he could read about it. He even took a trip up to the Roxbury Rubber Company in New York to show them a fancy new inflation tube he designed for life preservers. But the manager there sat him down and confessed a really dark industry secret. The rubber business, it was actually on the verge of total, catastrophic ruin. You see, natural rubber had a fatal flaw. It was practically useless in extreme temperatures. In the dead of winter, it turned bone-hard and brittle, like a rock. But in the summer heat, oh man, it was a nightmare. Products literally melted down into this foul-smelling, rotting, sticky goo. Customers were demanding refunds and returning goods by the absolute truckload. Seeing this massive, glaring industrial problem, Goodyear just decided right then and there that he was destined to solve it. And the wildest part? He started his very first experiments to cure rubber while sitting inside a Philadelphia debtor's prison after getting locked up by a creditor. Section 3. A desperate, dangerous obsession. Getting out of that debtor's prison didn't deter him. It fueled him. Charles Goodyear absolutely refused to give up. He sold off his family's furniture, moved his wife and kids into a cheap boarding house, and set up his experiments in a tiny New York attic. Things got desperately bleak. To survive, his family was literally reduced to catching wild frogs and digging up half-frozen potatoes from the ground just to scrape together enough calories to live. It was absolute, grinding, brutal poverty, all fueled by one man's relentless obsession. This sheer persistence led to a pretty wild and honestly dangerous trial and error process. First, he tried mixing the raw rubber with magnesia. It seemed to work for a second, but then, nope, turned right back into sticky goo. Next, he tried boiling it in quicklime and water. The press actually applauded him for this one, but then he found out a single drop of weak acid completely ruined the whole batch. Third try, a surface cure using nitric acid. This actually worked well enough to earn him a letter of commendation from President Andrew Jackson. But those harsh chemicals completely poisoned his body. He nearly suffocated from toxic gas in his lab, catching a fever that almost took his life. And tragically, during these dark years of toxic fumes and crushing poverty, 2 of his infant sons passed away. Section 4. The fiery breakthrough. Despite that immense, unimaginable human cost, Goodyear just kept pushing. From 1834 to 1839, he bounced around from investor to investor, factory to factory. And finally, the massive climax of our story happens in 1839 at a rubber factory in Woburn, Massachusetts. While working near a hot stove, Goodyear accidentally dropped a mixture of rubber and sulfur right onto the burning metal surface. He expected it to melt into a gross puddle, just like natural rubber always did. But instead, something miraculous happened. It hardened. What happened on that hot stove was a literal game changer. Goodyear named this process vulcanization, after Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, which is pretty fitting. Basically, vulcanization is the chemical process of combining rubber and sulfur over intense heat. It's like a chemical magic trick. That specific combination fundamentally alters the molecular structure of the rubber, turning it into a rigid, stable, and completely waterproof material that wouldn't melt in July or snap in January. He did it. The sticky rubber problem was permanently fixed, and he had just unlocked one of the greatest industrial secrets of the 19th century. Section 5. Patents, Pirates, and Prisons. Now, you'd think this is the part where he pops champagne and becomes a multimillionaire, right? Sadly, no. The bitter, heartbreaking irony here is that his monumental scientific triumph really only brought him endless legal nightmares, stolen ideas, and, you guessed it, more prison time. As soon as word of his process got out, jealous, failed rubber entrepreneurs started coming out of the woodwork, falsely claiming that Goodyear had actually stolen the idea from them. The timeline of his so-called success just quickly devolved into absolute chaos. Let's look at how this played out. In 1844, he finally perfects the process and secures U.S. patent number 3633. Awesome, right? Except he spends years tied up in court defending it, even having to hire the famous orator Daniel Webster as his lawyer. Then, in 1852, he travels to Europe, only to discover that a British guy named Thomas Hancock had seen samples of Goodyear's rubber, reverse-engineered it, and filed a British patent first. And in 1855, the ultimate dramatic irony. While proudly demonstrating his vulcanized rubber at a huge exposition in Paris, he racks up even more debt. The French government literally awards him the incredibly prestigious Legion of Honor while he is sitting locked inside a French debtor's prison. You really can't make this stuff up. Which brings us, quite somberly, to Section 6, a priceless legacy. By 1860, Charles Goodyear was 59 years old. He was exhausted, and his health was completely shattered from decades of inhaling toxic lab chemicals. In July of that year, he was rushing to New York after getting the heartbreaking news that his daughter was severely ill. But when he arrived, he was told she had already passed away. The grief was just too much to bear. He collapsed and died shortly after at the Fifth Avenue Hotel in New York City. And what did this brilliant inventor leave behind for his family? A staggering $200,000 in debt. To put that massive number into perspective, it's not that he never made a dime. Goodyear actually earned over $160,000 from his patent during his lifetime. But he constantly funneled every single penny he had right back into his research, his endless court battles, and paying off old creditors. He literally just didn't keep proper accounting books. His lifelong obsession left his estate buried under this mountain of debt, which his surviving son had to painstakingly untangle just to scrape together a modest income for his grieving family. Which circles us right back to our original question at the beginning of this explainer. Who is the billionaire behind the blimp? Well, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company wasn't even founded until 1898 by a guy named Frank Seiberling. That is almost 4 decades after Charles Goodyear had passed away. Seiberling decided to name his brand new tire company purely in honor of Charles Goodyear. It was a nod of profound respect, recognizing the immense, truly heartbreaking sacrifices the man had made to give vulcanized rubber to the world. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this hauntingly beautiful thought from Charles Goodyear himself. While reflecting on a life filled with poverty, stolen patents, and constant, grinding struggle, he wrote, "The advantages of a career in life should not be estimated exclusively by the standard of dollars and cents, as is too often done. Man has just cause for regret when he sows and no one reaps." Charles Goodyear planted the seeds for an entire global industry, and he did it at the total cost of his own life and fortune, just so the rest of the world could reap the benefits. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many other everyday items that we totally take for granted were born from the hidden tragedies of forgotten geniuses? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the world around you.